This is Goku-san DBZ, and welcome back for the first in a while special new episode of Sales History. The first one I ever did was on the Tekken series. Second one was on the Soul series. And from a special request on a comment for my previous one, asked me to do a Sales History look back at a specific series. Actually, personally, I have a fondness for myself. And you hear music in the background from DOA 2. That is because this is the sales history of the Dead or Alive franchise. So hopefully you enjoy this. And I chose Ryu Hayabusa's theme, Extended Edition from Dead or Alive 2. So with that said, it's the basic information. Now there are like one or two games on this list I couldn't get 100% concrete sales numbers on, so you'll have to forgive me, but this is the release date, plus I will mention what platforms these Dead or Alive games came out on, and also looking at the basic critic response when the game first came out. So I'll mention critic scores, except there are two games I could not find critic scores on, strangely enough. Solid critic scores. Now, regular standard Metacritic scores more among users I could find, but I wanted to use strictly critic only. So with that said, first up is Dead or Alive 1, which of course was released in the US and stuff in 1998. Relatively young versus other fighters. It would be released on the original PlayStation, and of course it would also be released on the Sega Saturn. In North America, I believe it was exclusively only released on the original PlayStation. In Japan, it did get released for the Saturn. Now, sales numbers wise, the Saturn port of it did not do too well overall sales. It was predominantly PlayStation, made up, I believe, somewhere around 80 to 85% of the total sales numbers of the original Dead or Alive. Now, as I said, released here in the West and stuff in 1998, and I mentioned platforms, it also got the average critic score. It scored a 8.3 out of 10, which is actually a pretty positive score overall. Obviously, from its gameplay aspects, it very much was influenced by, of course, Virtua Fighter, which is a series I might actually do one of these sales histories for in the future. Also, leave a comment before I continue on. Let me know if there are any other specific fighting franchises you'd like me to do this sales history on, or perhaps a completely different genre, like a first-person shooter franchise or a RPG franchise, platformer. Doesn't matter. If I can get at least reasonable details and information out, then I will do one of these specials for it. Total numbers that I can find overall concrete-wise, the original Dead or Alive did 460,000 copies sold. Not a humongous number, but it was a new fighting franchise, of course. And one thing's for a certain fact, at this time period, still 2D fighters were technically the juggernaut genre, with the exception of games like, of course, specific 3D fighters that come to mind from that time period was games like, of course, Tekken being the biggest. The Virtua Fighter had a pretty decent following. Its next game, Dead or Alive 2. Now, this, of course, would get released on the Dreamcast and the PlayStation 2, though on PlayStation 2 it would be named and have a couple of add-ons from the original Dreamcast version, which was the original port. It, on PlayStation 2, would be renamed Dead or Alive 2 Hardcore. Personally, I think of the platforms of Dead or Alive 2 I've played, PS2 version is my least favorite. I love the Dreamcast for nostalgia factor. But this excludes the Ultimate. That is actually separate, the way it was released. So with that said, Dead or Alive 2, as I said, was released on the Dreamcast and the PS2. Um, Released in 2000, Dead or Alive 2 Hardcore was released within the first year of course, the PS2's lifespan, but it was originally released in 2000, of course, on the Sega Dreamcast. Critic scores. The PlayStation 2 port had a 8.3 out of 10, which is very solid, and the Dreamcast version had a 9 out of 10, which, actually, looking back in numbers, is the second highest rated of the franchise among critics. It would end up doing worldwide around 1,250,000, which is not bad. I mean, that is definitely over double of the first game in sales numbers. It did about 2.5 times as much. Not humongous numbers, mind you, versus like Tekken and stuff, but still, it was a pretty good jump in sales from under 500,000 to 1,250,000, or 1.25. Next up, and as I said, I have fond memories of that game. Next up is Dead or Alive 3, of course, which would be the first of a couple of exclusives to the Microsoft platform. Funny enough, in sales numbers, at least in solid sales numbers and physical sales, Dead or Alive 3 would end up the best-selling of the Dead or Alive franchise, which is interesting, given it was only had one single platform release exclusive, but a lot of Xbox fans gravitated towards Dead or Alive 3. In my opinion, it's the best game in the Dead or Alive series. Well, it's between that and Dead or Alive Ultimate Volume 2. But total, it would be, of course, released in 2002 in the West, and it would, like mentioned, it would do 2,040,000 units. So over 2 million, that's pretty impressive. And its critic score would end up at an 8.3, which is a very solid critic score. It's a lot, 8.3 surprisingly. Next up, we move on to 2003 for the first non-fighting Dead or Alive game, which would become a sub-series. A series I'm not really personally a fan of, though I gotta admit, I kind of like the gambling mechanic, like playing blackjack and stuff like that. That's actually, I think, the best part of the game. Released in 2003. Total, it would end up with a critic score of a 6.6, which isn't too bad, I guess. And that is, of course, released exclusively on the original Xbox. That being, of course, Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball. It ended up doing the sales at around 590,000 copies, which is not too bad overall. It's actually surprisingly good for a volleyball game, and for the type of game it was. But still, surprisingly, actually has a following. I know of at least 2 people that actually really like the first Dead or Alive game. They actually enjoyed the actual volleyball mechanics and everything and thought it's a solid volleyball game. Next up, we would move on to 2004, and that would be the release on, of course, exclusive to the original Xbox, Dead or Alive Ultimate, which is my personal favorite version of Dead or Alive 2, and also I gotta say, I prefer also, even though it's not really any different, but still, I think it looks a little better, that being, of course, with it, a remaster of sorts at that time of the original Dead or Alive game. It would end up doing a critic score of an 8.1, which is decent overall, and it would end up selling about 500,000 units, 500,000, which is not bad given it's just a remaster of the first 2 games, though I still think it's the superior version of Dead or Alive 2, personally. But still, overall, it did pretty good for just a collection type thing. Then we would move on to the next console generation, and that being Dead or Alive 4. It would be released exclusive to the Xbox 360 Also, in my opinion, it's probably the hardest game in the series, difficulty-wise, because the computer was kind of overpowered in the game. And it was weird that we got a guest character from Halo, a Spartan. Um, and it would have the biggest pain in the you-know-what with the boss, Alpha 152, would be the main boss of Dead or Alive 4. And boy, is she overpowered as all heck. It would end up selling around 1,250,000. It would end up doing pretty much equal numbers to Dead or Alive 2, though that was Dead or Alive 2 on 2 platforms, where DOA 4 was exclusive to 360. Still, there's a very loyal fan base to the DOA series among Xbox gamers. And it's thanks to the specific games is, I think, why, numbers-wise, there's more fans among Xboxers than there are any other platform. Next up, we move on. Of course, that was 2006, by the way. Next up, we would move on to 2007 for Dead or Alive Extreme 2, or Extreme Beach Volleyball 2. It would end up getting only a 5.3 among critics score, not great. It would also end up doing a sales of around 250,000, which is definitely a major drop versus the first Dead or Alive volleyball game, which did almost 600,000. This one only did 250,000, so that's a pretty massive drop in sales. Then we would see a game I could care less about, and it's easily the most disliked game among critics. And this was released in 2010, basically just another version of a volleyball game for portable, and that is Dead or Alive Paradise. It would do around 200,000 in sales, and it was exclusive to the PSP, surprisingly. Next up, we move on to 2012 for another portable Dead or Alive game, and that being Dead or Alive Dimensions, which in my opinion is superb, and it's nice how they did like a story mode entangling the stories from Dead or Alive 1 through Dead or Alive 4, which is really nice in my opinion. And the roster is massive, and the fact you can unlock and play with all the boss characters in Dead or Alive Dimensions. Of course, it was exclusive to the Nintendo 3DS, which is actually cool, and it's actually probably one of the fastest rising in price of the DOA series. So if you don't have it on the 3DS, I recommend picking it up. It would end up getting a critic score of a 7.8, which is actually pretty decent, especially over the last couple. It would end up doing 450,000 copies in units. So that's actually decent. At least it's a somewhat increase, and given it was a Nintendo handheld game, I get really 450,000 isn't bad when you take those into account. Next up, we would see the release of the vanilla version of Dead or Alive 5. It would be released in 2012 on the PS3 and the 360, so it would end up going multi-platform. It got a 7.6 among critics, and it ended up selling about 650,000 copies, which is not too bad overall. It's definitely a jump up over the last few. Also, then, like about a year later, we would see a port to handheld, and that is Dead or Alive 5 Plus. Released in 2013, it would be, of course, released on the PlayStation Vita, which in my opinion is superb. Frankly, I'm not sure which game I preferred, Dead or Alive 5 Plus or Dead or Alive Dimensions of handheld. But it would end up, again, in a critical score of an 8 out of 10, so it actually got a little jump. That's not bad. It ended up selling about 100,000 copies on the Vita. Given the Vita's amount of owners is much smaller overall size-wise, So 100,000 is okay. I would have hoped it would have done like 2 to 300,000, but it's unfortunate. It kind of sucks. Next we have Dead or Alive 5 Ultimate, which would be the ultimate version on previous generation consoles. It had, I could not find an overall critic score on this game, unfortunately. It would be released exclusive to the Xbox 360, strangely enough. Couldn't find overall sales numbers for some reason. Next we have Dead or Alive 5 Last Round, which of course would be released on current gen. It would be the ultimate version with all the DLC characters and everything. It would end up being released, of course, on the Xbox One and the PS4. It would be released in 2015. It got a critic score of a 7.1. Dead or Alive 5 Last Round, of course. It would also get 6 million downloads for the free-to-play version of the game. So even though it only sold physical and stuff, 350,000 copies, still for just an improved version, that's not too bad. But, and it's kind of crazy that I got 6 million downloads, but when you have a free-to-play mode, it's no surprise I got that many downloads. But that helped, I think, get more people to check out the series as a whole. Second to last, we have, of course, the somewhat controversial Dead or Alive Extreme 3, which never even got a Western version release in Europe or in North America. And we know why that is that happened. But overall, it did only 60,000 copies sold. And of course it was released strictly domestically in Japan. So if you wanted the game, you had to import. So I am not surprised that only sold 60,000, but boy is that a drop. Then we come to Dead or Alive 2. Or Dead or Alive 2. Dead or Alive 6. Starting to get tired, it's getting late. It would end up scoring around a 9.0, which is actually very solid in my opinion. In fact, it would end up being tied with the Dreamcast port of DOA 2 for being the highest rated among critics, so that's pretty good. It would be released, of course, on Xbox One, PS4, and Steam. In last year, 2019, physical sales are estimated at about 350,000 copies. Not the greatest, but still not super awful, but still a real drop. Now, a digital version of the game, it has so far received 2 million digital copies. Now, I'm not sure how many of them are actual sold versions. From what I understand, that's a mixture of that and the free-to-play, so it's hard to say how much of that is free-to-play and how much is actual paid digitally. Hard to say on that. But still, overall, not too bad. DOA 6, I frankly feel, deserves a little more love and respect than it got, unfortunately. But with that said, this was a new edition of history, or rather sales history, of the Dead or Alive series. I'll see y'all next time. Stay safe out there. See you again. Same YouTube time, same YouTube channel.